Do you have ID or proof of citizenship?
Yes, here's my passport, state medical license, and hospital ID.
Why are you refusing to cooperate with the stop?
I'm not refusing. I am requesting immediate medical attention.
We all walk through life wrapped in a comforting illusion of security. We believe that if we play by the rules, work hard, and carry the right credentials, we are shielded from the arbitrary chaos of the world. We trust that our passports, our degrees, and our fundamental rights are impenetrable armor. But what happens when that armor is stripped away in an instant by a stranger's hasty assumption? What occurs when the very system designed to uphold the law allows a deeply flawed bias to override irrefutable facts? This is a story about the devastating cost of misjudgment. It is a cautionary tale that asks us to examine the fragile nature of our legal protections when confronted with unchecked assumptions, and it carries a vital lesson. True justice is impossible if we refuse to see the human being standing right in front of us. Imagine a woman stepping out of a bustling metropolitan hospital as the late afternoon sun casts long shadows over the concrete parking garage. She is wearing the familiar uniform of her profession, crisp hospital scrubs underneath a tailored white coat. Stitched meticulously into the fabric of that coat is her name, followed by the letters M.D. In her purse rests a United States passport, officially documenting her birth in the heart of Atlanta, Georgia. She is highly educated, deeply respected, and completely exhausted after a grueling day of consultations. This brilliant physician is 34 years old and serves as the director of maternal and fetal medicine at a major regional healthcare center. Her journey to this parking garage was paved with relentless dedication. Raised in the working-class neighborhoods of Chicago by a father who walked a daily mail route and a mother who taught in the public school system, she understood the value of hard work from the time she could walk. She carried the legacy of her grandparents who had migrated from the Deep South, using their sacrifices as fuel. She chose to attend a historically significant university to be surrounded by a community of driven, visionary peers, graduating at the very top of her class before securing a full merit scholarship to one of the most prestigious medical schools in Baltimore. She didn't just want to be a doctor, she wanted to be the last line of defense. She chose to specialize in the most precarious, terrifying pregnancies, the ones where a mother's body turns against itself, where the line between a miraculous birth and a devastating tragedy is razor thin. For nearly a decade, she has been the calm voice in the storm for panicked parents. She has safely brought hundreds of fragile infants into the world. But on this particular crisp autumn afternoon, she is not just a doctor, she is a patient. She is deep into her third trimester, carrying her first child. Because of her extensive medical background, she knew the odds were complex. Being in her mid-30s and navigating her first pregnancy, she fell into a higher risk category. Everything had been progressing beautifully until a few weeks prior, when her blood pressure began a slow, insidious climb. It wasn't yet at a crisis point, but it was moving in the wrong direction. Her own obstetrician had placed her on a rigorous monitoring schedule, hyper-vigilant for the earliest whispers of a dangerous condition that causes a pregnant woman's blood pressure to skyrocket, threatening both her life and the life of her unborn child. That morning, she had awakened with a dull, persistent ache behind her eyes. It was a subtle symptom, one that might be easily brushed off by an ordinary patient as simple fatigue. But she wasn't an ordinary patient. She knew the medical literature inside and out. She knew this headache could be a harbinger of a catastrophic organ failure. She had a critical follow-up appointment scheduled for that very evening. Her plan was simple. Leave the hospital promptly, drive directly to her specialist, and get hooked up to the monitors. If the numbers were bad, she would be admitted and medicated immediately. She had the medical records tucked neatly in her bag. As she approached her vehicle, eager to get to the safety of her doctor's office, the illusion of her secure life shattered. Two federal enforcement agents, clad in tactical vests, stepped into her path, effectively blocking her in. They were conducting a targeted sweep based on an anonymous, incredibly vague tip. They were searching for an undocumented expectant mother in her early 30s. That was the entirety of their criteria. No name, no specific height, no vehicle description, no unique identifiers. It was a physical profile so unimaginably broad that thousands of innocent women traversing the city that day could have fit the description. She remained calm, relying on logic and the law. She understood the legal concept of a lawful stop and the necessity of reasonable suspicion. She assumed this was a simple misunderstanding that could be cleared up in seconds. She reached into her bag and produced her United States passport, clearly showing her American citizenship and her Georgia birthplace. She handed over her state-issued medical license. She presented her heavy plastic hospital identification badge. In a functioning system, this overwhelming mountain of verifiable evidence would be the end of the encounter. But one of the agents looked at the intricately stamped passport, glanced at the hospital badge, and allowed a profound implicit bias to cloud his judgment. Instead of seeing an esteemed American physician, he saw someone who matched a vague suspect profile. He made a hasty, disastrous assumption that all of her perfectly valid, federally issued documents were sophisticated forgeries. Have you ever experienced a moment where someone completely dismissed your truth, no matter how much evidence you provided? Imagine that feeling, but with your life and the life of your unborn child hanging in the balance. Without her consent and ignoring the irrefutable proof of her identity, the agents detained her. Her purse, containing her entire life's documentation, was confiscated and unceremoniously dropped into a clear plastic evidence bag. She was transported across town and placed into a sterile, concrete holding facility. The clock began to tick, and with every passing minute her body pushed closer to the edge. Sitting on a rigid bench under harsh fluorescent lights, she felt the headache morph from a dull throb into an excruciating band of iron tightening around her skull. Her vision began to blur, the harsh overhead lights fracturing into blinding halos. Her fingers swelled tight against her wedding ring. This was her nightmare coming to life. She didn't just feel sick. She was clinically diagnosing her own rapid deterioration. She walked up to the intake desk, speaking to the detention officer with the practiced, clear urgency of a medical professional. She explained her exact symptoms. She stated unequivocally that she was experiencing a severe, life-threatening hypertensive crisis. The officer simply nodded, jotted a note on a legal pad, and promised that someone would look into it. No one came. As the evening deepened and the time for her crucial medical appointment came and went, the pressure inside her blood vessels reached catastrophic levels. She approached the desk a second time, then a third. Each time her requests grew more desperate. She pleaded with the staff, explaining that without immediate pharmaceutical intervention, she was at risk of a massive seizure. The desk officer, bound by bureaucratic red tape and lacking any medical training, merely continued to log the complaints, stating that no medical personnel were currently on the premises. By her fifth attempt to get help, the calm, collected physician had been replaced by a terrified mother. She explicitly told the guards her professional credentials, begging them to understand that she was an expert in this exact field and that her baby was in imminent danger. She warned them that a failure to act would result in irreversible consequences. Her final plea, captured perfectly on the facility's security surveillance, was a haunting, desperate cry for survival. Over the course of her confinement, she begged for a doctor 8 separate times. The official facility log would later show that absolutely 0 medical evaluations were provided. While she was trapped in administrative purgatory, the outside world was descending into panic. Her husband, a brilliant cardiologist who had bonded with her years ago over the shared pressure of navigating highly competitive medical spaces, was frantically dialing her phone. When she failed to show up for her vital checkup, the hospital's security director sprang into action. Pulling the exterior surveillance footage, the director witnessed the chilling scene in the parking garage. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the director immediately began calling the federal enforcement agency. The security director provided everything: badge numbers, medical license details, and passport information, explaining with desperate clarity that a high-risk pregnant American citizen had been wrongfully swept up in a botched operation. The phone on the detaining agent's desk rang and rang. Surveillance footage from inside the precinct would later reveal the agent staring at the flashing incoming call light, making a conscious choice to lift his finger and press the decline button. He was so thoroughly convinced of his initial misjudgment, so entirely focused on processing a suspect he had invented in his mind, that he ignored the outside world trying to hand him the truth. It took intervention from a high-ranking supervisor, reached hours later, to finally break the spell of bureaucratic indifference. Over 6 hours after she was first stopped, she was handed back her belongings. Her passport, her medical license, and her hospital badge were returned to her, the exact same documents that had been dismissed as fake mere hours before. But the release was not a victory. It was the beginning of a medical catastrophe. The hospital security director was waiting in the agency parking lot, engine running. One look at the doctor's face, pale, agonizingly swollen, and grimacing against the ambient streetlights, was all it took. They tore through the city streets, rushing straight to the emergency room where she worked. The attending emergency physician, a colleague who had known her for years, didn't even wait for an explanation. He took one look at her neurologically compromised posture and shouted for a crash cart. When the cuff inflated around her arm, the reading was horrifying. Stroke-level hypertension, a number so dangerously high it threatened to rupture the delicate vessels in her brain. Laboratory tests instantly confirmed the absolute worst-case scenario. The window for managing the condition with gentle medication and observation had slammed shut hours ago in a cold holding cell. Her own obstetrician arrived breathless, reviewing the frantic readouts on the monitors. They were forced to make the agonizing decision that haunts every medical professional: an immediate emergency surgical delivery. The baby was not ready for the world. The lungs were undeveloped, the organs fragile, but the mother's body was failing so rapidly that waiting even another 30 minutes would likely be fatal for them both. As they wheeled her rapidly down the stark white corridors toward the operating theater, her husband sprinted through the hospital doors, having broken every speed limit in the city to find her. He found his wife surrounded by a swarm of surgeons, intravenous lines snaking from her arms, a fetal monitor strapped tightly across her abdomen. In the chaotic urgency of the prep room, he held her trembling hand. She wept, telling him it was too soon. He could only promise her that their colleagues would do everything humanly possible. Just before midnight, the incision was made. A tiny, fragile baby girl was pulled from the womb, weighing barely over 2 pounds. She was completely unable to breathe on her own. A specialized neonatal resuscitation team descended instantly, working with terrifying, calculated speed to force air into her tiny, undeveloped lungs. For the husband standing on the periphery of the sterile room, the reality of the situation crashed over him with devastating clarity. He watched a machine breathe for his newborn daughter. He watched them whisk her away in a plastic incubator, and he knew with the cold, analytical mind of a physician exactly what had caused this. His child was born a season too early, not because of an unavoidable medical tragedy, but because an armed agent looked at his wife's valid credentials and allowed an unfounded bias to dictate reality. The aftermath of that terrible night transformed into a relentless pursuit of accountability. A fierce veteran civil rights attorney took the family's case, specializing in holding massive bureaucratic systems responsible for their failures. The lawsuit was built on a foundation of unassailable recorded truth. The attorney didn't need to rely on memories. She had the digital footprint of the entire ordeal. She had the security footage from the parking lot. She had the time-stamped medical records showing a manageable condition turning into a lethal crisis exactly during the window of confinement. She had the devastating logs of 8 ignored pleas for help. During the deposition, the attorney systematically dismantled the detaining agent's defense. When pressed to articulate exactly what made him suspect the doctor's official passport was fake, he could offer nothing but vague deflections. He admitted to having only basic document verification training. When confronted with his decision to decline the frantic phone calls from the hospital, he claimed he was simply following standard processing protocols. The pivotal moment came when the attorney asked him a question that would echo through the courtroom during the trial. You heard an expectant mother explicitly state she was experiencing a life-threatening medical emergency 8 separate times over the course of an evening, and you did absolutely nothing. The agent's response was that he was adhering to procedure. The attorney played the footage of that interaction for the jury, but more powerfully, she played the deafening 19 seconds of silence that followed her question during the deposition. She let the jury sit in that uncomfortable, heavy silence. She let them feel the weight of a system that prioritizes a flawed procedure over a desperate human life. The jury's decision was monumental and resounding. They awarded a multi-million-dollar verdict to the family, specifically citing the willful indifference to human life demonstrated by the agents. The financial penalty was designed to encompass the massive ongoing medical costs for a child who would spend nearly 100 days in a neonatal intensive care unit and face a lifetime of developmental hurdles. Furthermore, the verdict included severe punitive damages aimed directly at the individuals and the agency responsible. But the victory extended far beyond a monetary settlement. The sheer scale of the negligence sparked a massive institutional overhaul. The agents involved faced severe professional and legal consequences, including termination and criminal convictions for their reckless endangerment. More importantly, the tragedy birthed sweeping, nationwide policy reforms. A new legal standard was established mandating that any detained pregnant individual must receive a comprehensive medical evaluation by a licensed professional within 60 minutes of their arrival, regardless of the circumstances of their detainment. The agency's protocols were completely rewritten, dictating that expectant mothers could only be held under the most extraordinary, clearly documented situations, and requiring high-level supervisor approval and immediate credential verification. The new protocols were rapidly adopted across dozens of states, ensuring that no one else's medical emergency would ever be ignored in the name of administrative processing. Today, the little girl who was forced into the world too soon is a spirited toddler. She is smaller than her peers and wears specialized glasses to correct the severe vision impairments caused by her premature birth. She attends multiple therapy sessions a week to help her reach basic developmental milestones. She is fighting every single day to overcome the physical deficit forced upon her by a stranger's bias. Her mother eventually returned to the hospital corridors she loves. She continues to direct the high-risk pregnancy ward, teaching a new generation of medical students how to save lives. But the invisible scars remain. She now carries her actual physical birth certificate folded in her pocket every single day. She carries it because she learned the hardest way imaginable that sometimes a valid federally issued passport isn't enough to prove you belong. During the trial, her husband delivered a testimony that broke the hearts of everyone listening. He explained that the darkest part of their nightmare wasn't the staggering medical bills or the endless nights watching monitors in the intensive care unit. The hardest part was watching his brilliant, capable wife blame herself. She agonized over why her expert medical warnings were ignored. She kept asking what more she could have done. And he had to look at the woman he loved and speak a painful, undeniable truth. They didn't listen because they had already made up their minds about who she was before she ever opened her mouth. Her decades of education, her prestigious title, and her legitimate citizenship meant nothing in the face of a snap judgment based on a vague, prejudiced description. This story forces us to ask ourselves uncomfortable questions. If legally binding, federally issued documents proving your identity and citizenship are not enough to protect you from being swept up in a flawed system, what exactly is? Should the mandatory medical evaluation protocols born from this tragedy be extended to every single person in custody, recognizing that the fundamental human right to emergency medical care should never be conditional? How do we build a society where the systems meant to protect us actually see the individuals standing in front of them rather than the assumptions they project onto them? We would love to hear your perspectives on these complex issues in the comments below. This event stands as a stark historical reminder that impressive credentials do not serve as a magical shield against systemic bias. A medical degree does not make you invincible. A passport does not guarantee your safety when the person looking at it has already decided you are guilty. But what this story also proves is the immense, undeniable power of the record. The unblinking eye of the security cameras, the meticulously documented hospital logs, the unyielding timestamps of a system's failure. These are the tools that force accountability. The record made it impossible for the institution to hide behind vague excuses. The undeniable evidence is what ultimately forced the system to change its ways, ensuring that the agonizing cries of a mother in distress could never be legally ignored again. Thank you for taking the time to absorb this profound story. I look forward to exploring more powerful narratives with you next time.